وصحبه ومن والاه. Alhamdulillah that we reached the recitation of Surah Al-Rum today after finishing the latter part of Surah Al-Ankabut. And although we read this yesterday, I wanted to just comment on it because it is of the utmost importance. And towards the end of Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in a little bit more subtle is it where you have the qalb. In a little bit more subtle, you have the fu'ad. In a little bit more subtle, you have the lub. And he traces in his work all the different verses in the Quran that pertain to those different levels of the heart. So the sadr, for instance, is also the place of sharh. Rabbi shrah li sadri. He didn't say qalbi. Rabbi shrah li sadri. Oh Allah, expand my heart. And so the sadr here is that it's even though it can also be used for your physical chest, it's a reference to the heart, but it tells us about the true nature of knowledge. Knowledge is not merely in a book. Knowledge is not merely at that tap of a finger that on a computer. Is that we are not merely just encyclopedias. Is that true knowledge is in the heart. And in every time is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will prepare people who have hearts that are receptacles of knowledge. And then when we transitioned into Surah Al-Rum, that Surah Al-Rum, Allah Ta'ala says after with the same huruf al-muqatta'a that we began Surah Al-Baqarah with, Alif Lam Mim, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومِ. The Romans have been defeated. فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. And he informs us that they will, that after فِي بِدْعَ سِنِينَ, in 3 to 9 years, then defeat, who is being referred to? The Persians. And the battle that took place is that the Muslims preferred the Romans to win over the Persians, which is a meaning is that even though both that were disbelievers, is that because the Romans were closer to the Tawheed of La ilaha Muhammad Rasulullah, they preferred them to win in battle. And so that this is a principle that we can then take, is that even if we're not dealing with people that believe exactly as we believe, is that there's preferences that we can make that are legitimate, that the closer that someone is to us, is that we can incline towards them, and that actually want them to have precedence over someone else. And one of the amazing things about Surah Al-Rum are all the verses that just come in a row. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ. And it was just very interesting for me to think about this, that this is that chapter on the Romans. And this is that 1,000 years before the Renaissance, which led to the Enlightenment, which around the same time you have the scientific revolution starting, all of these tendencies that took place, such that the globalized world is really that Western, in a sense. And how there's just an emphasis here on ayat. And this is one of the consequences of this long, complicated process, is that you have what is called a demystification of nature, where now nature is not, and this is even before the postmodern world, it's even more convoluted, but the idea of nature as a machine, where it loses its sacredness, where it's no longer a sign, it's something that we need to conquer and use that for physical benefit. So it's just really interesting to me that there's so many verses. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, as that Allah Ta'ala created you from turab, and then He made you human beings that are widespread. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, as that He created that spouses for you from your own selves. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, the creation of the heavens and the earth. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, is that you're asleep during the day and during the night and during the day. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, is that He shows you that lightning and just that all of these different signs. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, so there's so many different verses that it would be that really interesting to look in depth at every single one of them, which obviously we don't have time to do, to show how that relates to this idea of them being in Surah Al-Rum. And then that one of the other verses that worth pointing out here is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأَقِيمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا, and that establish that your sincerity for the primordial religion. And then Allah Ta'ala says, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا, the fitrah of Allah that He originated people in. لا تبديل لخلق الله. There's no changing the creation of Allah. In other words, is that Allah Ta'ala speaks to the fitrah. And this is something from the blessing of Allah, is that 1400 plus years later, is that we still have the ability to preserve the fitrah. And the same word that we use for originator, I can't remember if it was that in one of these or another, we've been recording different talks, but that one of the things that Allah Ta'ala says on the tongue of Abraham is, وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِيَ لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. I direct my internal essence towards the one who originated the heavens and the earth. So the Fatir, the originator, you could also roughly translate as creator, is the one who created the original disposition of the human being, which is the fitrah. And the reality of the fitrah is that innate Adamic ability to know our Lord Jalla Jalaluhu. And that when it remains intact, it will naturally believe. When it remains intact, it will naturally fulfill the function that it is supposed to fill. And that it's really amazing to connect this idea of fitrah, which really is one of the greatest rational proofs that for the existence of Allah in our time is the proof of fitrah. That this is the way human beings are. They are religious beings. That still remains that despite this onslaught against religion and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it comes in Surah to Rome, which is that really, really fascinating, and because that no one has tried to destroy the fitrah, or this is the consequence of what has happened, like this civilization has. And alhamdulillah that we still have that teachings that preserve it, and this is the essence of that what we learn from the deen of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when the fitrah is preserved, it is the bedrock then for us to have all of the good manifestations of the deen. May Allah ta'ala preserve our fitrah, and may we come back in tune with the fitrah in this blessed month of Ramadan, and may we all fulfill our human potential. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.